Darya Dugina, daughter of prominent Russia ultra-nationalist and Putin ally Alexander Dugin, was killed on Saturday when the car she was driving exploded near Moscow. Russia's Federal Security Service says Ukraine is responsible for the killing. Kyiv denies any involvement. Will Dugina's death now be the spark Russia has needed to escalate a war that, by all accounts, it was starting to lose? Welcome to the program. I'm Chatham. Alexander Dugin has long called for the unification of Russian-speaking territories into a vast new Russian empire. Darya Dugina, also known as Darya Platonova, supported her father's ideas and appeared on Russian state TV in her own right to support the country's actions in Ukraine. Dugina was the chief editor of an online publication considered to be a misinformation source by the US State Department. The website suggested Ukraine would perish if admitted to the NATO military alliance. Both father and daughter were on a US sanctions list. There is speculation that Dugin himself may have been the intended target. Well, joining us now to discuss this from Oxford in the UK, we have Samuel Ramani, Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. In Kyiv, Ukraine, we have Mykola Vorobiov, Ukrainian political and military journalist. And joining us from Northamptonshire in the UK, Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Good to have you all with us. Keir Giles, if I could start with you. Now, regardless of who may have been behind this attack or whether Darya Dugina herself was the intended target, there's a lot of speculation about out there, whether it was the Russians, whether it was Ukrainians, false flags, so on. We may never know the answer. But is it fair to say that the Russians are going to take advantage of this going forward as much as they can?
Oh, absolutely, yes. This gives Russia the excuse it probably didn't need for any one of a range of actions, both domestically and against Ukraine. Now, you mentioned there are all sorts of possibilities for who might be behind this. I think there's one that we can rule out fairly straightforwardly, and that, of course, is Ukraine itself and an action by Ukrainian special forces, for example. That is what the Russian propagandists are going to town on, but it's actually the least likely explanation because it would serve Ukraine's interest not at all to eliminate this person. They might be loathed and detested in Ukraine and around the world, but that's a very different matter from actually seeing any benefit in trying to assassinate them. Instead, I think we need to look inside Russia for the intrigues and all of the different possibilities and all the different state and non-state interests that might be served by trying to kill Alexander Dugin.
All right, let's get the view from Kyiv then. Mykola Vorobiov, the Russians are blaming this squarely on Ukraine. What's the mood in Kyiv right now and the feeling of how Russia is going to respond to this?
So first of all, I would like to remind you who is Mr. Dugin. So he is a prominent Russian philosopher, and he inspired in many ways Russian nationalism because he widely spread his far-right ideas based on the Russian orthodoxy and so forth. So in many ways, he inspired this invasion of Ukraine. And of course, many Ukrainians, most of Ukrainians, have a negative attitude to him and his daughter, of course, because his daughter also expressed the ideas that Russians should kill Ukrainians, they should wipe out Ukrainian cities and seize as more as possible of the Ukrainian lands. And also, as her father, she denied that Ukrainians exist as a nation, as an Ukrainian country exist as a state. So, of course, the most of Ukrainians express their negative attitude to this propagandist. On the other hand, Ukrainians denied the accusation that they were involved in this assassination, and including the Russian propaganda and blaming Azov battalion. And of course, they also said that that was not their job, actually. So Ukrainian is preparing to celebrate its 34th independence on August 24th. And of course, there might be some provocations. And many Ukrainian experts and people who are engaged with these topics and top officials, they say that that might be some provocation on these celebration days for Ukraine.
Samuel Ramani, where does Alexander Dugin fit into all of this, regardless of who may have actually been behind this car bombing?
So Alexander Dugin has been mischaracterized in the West as a very influential advisor to Vladimir Putin. He often gets the phrase Putin's brain, which came from a foreign affairs article written shortly after the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, or Putin's Rasputin. But in reality, Dugin is merely a commentator who articulates in a way that's very internationally responsive the hardline Russian nationalist and Eurasianist ideology. In his book, Foundations of Geopolitics in 1997, he certainly talked about Ukraine not being a real state, talked about Ukraine being artificial, Russia embracing a multipolar world order, and shunning the West. But he was not really the originator of either of those ideas, because those views on Ukrainian sovereignty were shared by people on the far right in Russia, like Vladimir Zhirinovsky, and his views on a multipolar order were shared by the foreign minister at the time, Evgeny Primakov. More recently, Dugin has positioned himself as being a hardline nationalist critic of Russia's interventions, always saying that they're not going far enough. In 2008 in Georgia, he didn't want them to stop at South Ossetia. He wanted them to annex Tbilisi and then go on to Crimea. In 2014, he decried the influence of liberals around Putin, who were discouraging him from invading all of Ukraine and liberating Novorossiya, the Russian regions. And now he's calling for a general mobilization and a draft. So at best, he's been a communicator of ideas that were already permeating around the Kremlin, or at other times, he's simply been out of step with what the Kremlin's thinking actually is, and that's what led to him being dismissed, for example, from Moscow State University in 2014, and being blackballed from some Russian state media outlets after he said that he didn't go far enough the first time in Ukraine.
All right, we're going to play. We're going to put up a graphic right now. This is a quote from Yekaterina Shulman, a Russian political analyst, and she says, "The reaction was immediate. It looks as if they were waiting for something like this to happen and could possibly be used to ramp up some public outrage within the country to justify even more active repression actions on the part of the state." Keir Giles, do you agree with that sentiment, that this is going to add sort of fuel to the fire in Russia?
Well, certainly it will add fuel to the fire, and of course it could have been designed to do precisely that. Now, what Katya Shulman is referring to in that quote is a pattern that's been noted by Russia watchers whenever an incident takes place that Russia denies responsibility in. If there is a swift and coordinated and systematic pattern of denials, then it appears to have been prepared in advance. So you assume that actually, yes, Russian state was culpable in this instance. On other occasions, the response is confused. It's haphazard, it's all over the place, and then there's some room for doubt as to whether Russia actually did this. But in this instance, Katya Shulman is actually correct. The response does seem to have been immediate, swift, coordinated, and that of course includes the Russian accusations against Ukraine, because the Federal Security Service, the FSB, has come up with some fairly ridiculous-looking evidence pointing at a notional Ukrainian citizen who was supposed to have carried out the assassination, and has left a series of comedy clues, like leaving her identification document from the Ukrainian National Guard behind. And of course it makes the FSB look foolish, because apparently they had this person under constant surveillance, but still prevented her actually murdering Dugin and then escaping the country. So it makes no sense whatsoever, but then plausibility isn't always a criterion for success when Russia's putting these stories together.
Mykola Vorobiov, is there a fear in Ukraine then about what may happen next and how Russia will react to this? You mentioned Ukrainian independence as well. There's been reports of Ukrainians being urged to leave Kyiv for fear of further attacks from Russia. How real is that fear?
Hazan, so this fear is real, very real. So I'm in Kyiv right now, and actually many people, they fled the city, of course, because they are afraid of their life, of their families, and they were notified that there would be some provocation on the Russian side. On the other hand, we observed the military build up in Belarus, and of course, in the Black Sea, where Russian just sent their military ships with cruise missiles, including Caliber or Kinzhal. So basically, that's the most sophisticated Russian cruise missiles, which can be used on the Independence Day to attack Ukrainian cities, including the capital. On the other hand, I want just to remind you that Russians, they are planning a tribunal, a show trial of the over the Ukrainian nationalist from the Azov regiment, which is banned in Russia, and as Kremlin propaganda portrays that Ukrainian Nazi and fascist and so forth. So basically, in many ways, this assassination of Dugin's daughter in Moscow can be used to justify this show trial, which is scheduled on Ukrainian Independence Day. So that's another perspectives or what Russians are going to launch on this day.
All right, we're going to play a clip now of Alexander Dugin talking about his daughter soon after her death.
She had no fear. It's true. When we spoke for the last time at the Tradition Festival, she said, "Dad, I feel like a warrior. I feel like a hero. And I want to be like that. I don't want any other destiny. I want to be with my people and my country."
Samuel, Ramani, we mentioned at the top how Darya Dugina was a commentator in her own right on Russian television, and her views very much mirrored her father's. And if we talk a little bit more about her father and what he represented, not just to many Russians, but how influential was he on Putin himself and his circle? Because that is a matter of some debate, isn't it?
So, well, first of all, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that Dugin has a substantive or even at all meaningful personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. Dugin allegedly had some ties to one of Putin's former advisors, Sergei Glaziev, who served as an advisor from 2012 to 2019 and was a clear enthusiast for the Eurasian Economic Union, which is part of the broader Greater Eurasia vision that Dugin has often espoused. But he's also out of office right now. There were some anecdotal discussions sometimes about Dugin having a relationship with Sergei Narishkin, but those have been largely debunked, and he never had an official position. So I think that Dugin's relationships with people in the Kremlin is grossly overstated, and we should be focusing a lot more on Dugin's linkages internationally, in particular his prestige amongst the European far right, and amongst other supporters of his anti-Western ideology, which extend even to Pan-African movements.
Mykola Vorobiov, what's your view on that, on the international influence that Dugin has, in particular with these other groups around Europe?
Well, Hazan, so another evidence that was mostly aimed to mobilize the Russian far-right movement and their people is that not many people know about Dugin, even here in Ukraine. So basically, in this way, these Russians are pursuing to find it's called a sacral victims. So basically, when it happened, when Putin came to power in early 2000, when these buildings were exploded, and they blamed Chechen separatists over that. And that gave a justification for Putin to invade Chechnya and to restart his military operation in the Republic. So it seems that it has the same signature. So basically, it's obviously Ukrainians were not interested in this assassination. And of course, it will be used mostly for the domestic audience and probably to inspire these people to go to fight to Ukraine, because before that they were more skeptical over this war, and now it is going to be some more some more sacral thing for Russians, especially on the far right side, and people who follow Dugin and all his ideas.
Keir Giles, how influential is Alexander Dugin within Russia, among ordinary Russians, in particularly on this idea of reigniting the Russian Empire within the Eurasian sphere and so on?
Well, I think, as you've already heard, both from Sam and Mykola, he was far more significant abroad than he was in Russia itself. And that's not only because of his role in whipping up support for Russia by these contacts with far-right nationalist extremist organizations. He was the poster child for Russia as an extremist state, and he would do tours. He would talk to like-minded people around Europe and beyond. Meanwhile, at home, of course, he's not the only person who thinks this stuff. He may have put it into words quite eloquently in his writings and in his speeches, but he's not the only person that believes in Russia rebuilding itself as an empire and conducting wars of genocidal reconquest in order to do so. There is plenty of support for that kind of program within Russia itself. President Putin would be embarking on this adventure even if Alexander Dugin had never existed, because Putin, like Dugin, isn't inventing this stuff. He's just tapping into deep roots of Russian state behavior that go back further even than the Soviet times. This is just a historical pattern which we see repeating again and will continue to repeat from Russia until it is repulsed by the combined efforts of Europe.
Samuel Ramani, what does this particular attack represent for security in Russia, particularly people of influence in Russia, people with money, because this kind of attack has echoes of the 1990s, a very chaotic period in Russian history when many disputes were basically settled with these kind of targeted killings.
Well, given the fact, as Keir has said, it's very unlikely the Ukrainians were involved in this, and I agree 100% with that. It certainly points to the fact that there are internal sources of criminality inside Russia that are threatening to the states. If you listen, for example, on the one hand, to Ilya Ponomarev, who's a dissident Russian MP who now has, since 2016, has been living in Ukraine. He was the only Russian in the Duma to oppose the annexation of Crimea. He would say that that threat is coming from the National Republican Army, so from organized opposition groups that have military wings and intentions. The Russian media has been trying to draw a linkage between those groups and the Ukrainian SBU since the Dugina assassination without much success, but that's one area where there could be threats to the elites. Another thing could be coming from the security services themselves, because Dugin was supporting a faster end to the war, an accelerated victory, was saying that the special military operation was not moving quickly enough. He had 100% confidence in Putin as a transformative figure, but maybe not necessarily in his ability to rally a general mobilization of Russian society around this war. So hardliners who support the draft and who support those more extreme measures could get targeted. We even seen, for example, Igor Girkin, who was the commander of the Donbass campaign first time around, and an ally of Dugin, was arrested a little over a week ago. So the potential for a season between the security services and hardliners, now that liberals have been quelled. And also, the Tradition Festival had many other individuals of prominence there, not just Dugin. There was Konstantin Malafiev, who's a Russian oligarch, businessman, who heads up Tsargrad, is close to the Russian Orthodox Church, who's promoting very similar ultra-nationalist ideas. So it's a warning shot to a lot of people, particularly in the ultra-nationalist far right in Russia.
Mykola Vorobiov, what's the mood in Ukraine then, as far as how this war is progressing and the feeling that it's not going Russia's way? How are Ukrainians responding to that?
Hazan, I don't think that the situation has changed dramatically in Ukraine after this assassination. That's another evidence that it was conducted mostly from the Russian for the Russian audience. Again, Ukrainians since the beginning, not on full-scale reinvasion 6 months ago, but at the beginning, from the annexation of Crimea, Ukrainian people stood to Russian aggression. So there is no problem with the draft in Ukraine, and there is no problem with motivation in the Ukrainian army and among the Ukrainian civilians. So I would just remind you that according to the recent polling, 87% of Ukrainians, they consider a victory as a full restoration of the Ukrainian sovereignty of 1991. So basically, it means taking control over all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. And 97% of Ukrainians, they believe in the victory of the Ukrainian army and people. So basically, in the end of the day, it didn't impact significantly Ukrainian politicians or Ukrainian political leadership or Ukrainian militaries. So, of course, people are concerned about some provocations, but on the other hand, Ukrainians, especially over the last 6 months, got used to it. So Ukraine is ready.
Keir Giles, where does this fit in terms of the dynamic of the internal power struggles within Russia? And could we expect more of these types of attacks inside Russia?
Well, Sam has given you already a roll call of all of the different reasons why people within Russia itself might have wanted to see Dugin dead. Now, let's not forget, of course, he's not going to be mourned and he's not going to get much sympathy if he is finally murdered from the rest of the world, because these are both, him and his daughter, fairly repellent individuals that have a deserved reputation for the vile propaganda that they've been sending out. But all of the people with an actual interest in trying to kill him, as Sam has listed, are actually inside Russia itself. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see a return to the 1990s with widespread attacks or murders, even if this National Republican Army, which has claimed responsibility, really does exist and really can carry out these attacks. It all depends on what the actual motivation for choosing Dugin was, whether it was demonstrative, for individuals within Russia and sending a message to people, as Sam already suggested, whether it was simply to provide an excuse for either domestic repression or an accelerated program of attacking Ukrainian cities, both of which is entirely possible. It would be completely within the bounds of normal Russian practice to sacrifice one of their prominent figures abroad in order to provide that excuse, or some other reason. Now, the people who are going to be looking over their shoulders most busily at the moment are Russia's other propagandists, because they themselves will see that they are potentially a target for the next attack. And that, of course, will explain some of their increased hysteria that we've seen over the last 48 hours, calling for reprisals, calling for stepping up efforts to try to destroy Ukraine. But the really interesting thing will be to see whether whoever does this finds it in their interest to reach closer to the Kremlin and to reach people who are more directly connected with the ruling elite in Russia than Dugin was.
Samuel Ramani, what's your view on this? Will this result in a lot of other prominent Russians, propagandists, to be looking over their shoulder?
Yeah, I agree with Keir on that. I think that even there was a controversy earlier in the spring where the FSB claimed that they had uncovered and they had stopped a Ukrainian plot to assassinate other propagandists in the Russia 1, Russia Svoboda networks. And that included the head of RT, Margarita Simonian, who's been very outspoken since the Dugina's death, even obliquely warning that a Skripal-type fate could await the alleged assassin of Dugina, and Vladimir Solovyov, who is the most popular anchor on Russia 1, who regularly calls and invites guests to support the genocide of Ukrainians. So certainly those propagandists will be looking over their shoulder, and their rhetoric may become even more extreme and ultra-nationalist. And I think that there could be more of these attacks to come if it is the National Republican Army that was behind this, or a unit like that.
Mykola Vorobiov, what's your view on how the Ukrainian government is likely to see this going forward, and in the way that they are going to defend themselves in this war?
Ukrainian government now is more concerned about how to defend its territory and its people, and to push Russians back from the Kherson region, from the southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, as 20% of Ukrainian territories remained under the Kremlin occupation. So basically, of course, that's assassination actually means that it will let Putin to unleash the repressions inside Russia. And on the other hand, this is a point of weakness of the Kremlin, because there are not many Russians are willing to fight in Ukraine. As many officers we see, so we see the phone interceptions and other leaks between Russian officers, and they are very demoralized. So basically, they don't see any fascist in Ukraine. They don't know what they are fighting for. most of them, they are just looters, who came to steal some stuff in Ukraine, like washing machines and another thing, or just to make money. So basically, that assassination means that basically Kremlin is desperate to seek more fighters to be sent in Ukraine without calling for a general draft, which is very unpopular in Russia from the political perspective. So actually, Ukraine is ready to fight back, and it's ready for any provocations. And again, as Ukrainian people got used to it, and I think that more such provocations are expected in the future.
All right, well, that is all we've got time for. Thanks very much, all three of you, Samuel, Ramani, Mykola Vorobiov, and Keir Giles. Thanks very much for being on Roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on this on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, for me and all the team here, goodbye and thanks for watching.